Hi everyone. Thanks everyone for being here today in our, I would say, presentation / workshop.
Yeah.
It's a combination of a bit of telling the story and then going to a more interactive part. But we want to take you on the journey of going from generative to regenerative technologies in this afternoon. Ola and I both work at Waag Future Lab, a little bit to the city center of Amsterdam, and we have our spaces there. We have our office sites 100 meters from there, but we've been around for 30 years, operating on the nexus of society and technology. We do that with a group of around 60 researchers, and we try to make technology and society more open, fair, and inclusive. When Marleen Sticker, our director, started Waag in 1994, there was really a maker-hacker vibe to it. We still try to maintain that today while also working more in the policy sphere. There's a lot of making and doing and trying to find alternatives. Ola is the concept developer in Team Life, one of the research groups. I'm head of program of that research group. We'll take you on a tour, and I will now hand over to Ola.
There's the question, right? We are here for Slow AI Festival. Is it actually possible to go slow? Caroline touched upon about how we can go small with AI. Like, we can technically achieve great effects with downsizing AI, but can we actually slow down this development? Yeah, it's hard, right? Because who are the people responsible for AI, the development of AI and its harmful practices, right? We have a whole bunch of accelerationists, so people who are promoting acceleration of technology at all costs. And do you guys remember AI Paul's letter? That seems like another life almost, right? Or death, if you will. Was it performative? Was it actually something? Now we can tell that it was mostly a performance, right? Because all those people involved completely forgot any ethics or any concerns that they mentioned in that letter and just absolutely gave into this new political wave of acceleration. You can kind of see what's happening in the States, also the birthplace of all tech, in a sense, like all the mass tech that we're experiencing. So you can tell how this politics is actually spreading. And yeah, it does not allow for much slowness, if you will. And what does it mean for us? For this acceleration to be possible, we have to source from natural resources like water, land, and minerals. Water, of course, is used to cool down mass data centers that you might actually notice them in the Netherlands, because Netherlands is the place to build data centers in Europe. So if you start to notice them, they're a bit difficult to notice, but they're building them all around. There's one big data center that people pass every day in the science park, and they have no idea that it's actually a data center because it masks itself so much. But the same data center runs on water and requires minerals. For this acceleration, we also have to think about scale and scalability that they're implementing in the design of AI. And now I have a great quote from Anat Singh. Scalability is indeed a triumph of precision design, not just in computers, but in business, development, the conquest of nature, and more generally, world making. So those people are not only thinking about accelerating technology, they're actually making a world different. Indeed, there's nothing immaterial about massless information that demands such energy from Earth. Great quote from Benjamin Bratton. I would recommend reading this because I think it's from early 2000, but it's really relevant right now. And what does this scalability as acceleration perpetuate? Well, the current politics of AI, we can look at it as a colonial action that then, of course, if it's so widespread, will trickle down to us, the consumers. We will be infected by this colonial mindset. And that's something to really, maybe you don't notice it when you interact with technology right now because it is purposefully boxed in, right? I think everybody here, I assume, heard of the concept of a black box, right? And yeah, the technology and then whatever runs in it is still boxed in. And we actually don't really know what's happening within it, even when you put it on our faces. Even if you have the actual box right on your face. So it remains inaccessible even if we try to look in through it. But actually what we are trying to do now We're trying to walk into those structures. We're trying to understand the infrastructure and what actually it entails to expand and accelerate this at this scale. Anybody knows this building? Anybody recognizes this building? That's one of the 2 large data centers in Science Park. We got to go in. I was really excited because it felt almost like meeting a celebrity. I bike next to this building all the time, and I always thought, oh, I want to finally see inside. And spoiler alert, it's not exciting to be in there. It was humming and it was making sounds, but it was just a bunch of white closets. But we get to see the water. We got to talk about the land. We got to talk about the minerals with the people that run these buildings. And by the way, there's maybe like a team of 10 people, some for security, some for just maintenance. But this huge building is run by very, very few people. So you can think about the minerals, resources, and land, and how very few people actually get to use it on a daily basis. Once we are done interacting with these sleek surfaces and sleek buildings, trying to understand the code, we will eventually meet the ugly side of this technology. Here it's actually a bit of an old school photo because there's a bunch of old TVs in there. You have to think about the materiality also of AI, that it also requires all these components. They're very much physical, they're very much decaying as we speak. So the technology that is now used to expand data centers, that they have to now expand because of the AI expansion, requires huge amounts of hardware and constant update. They actually have a relatively short lifespan, like we've learned at the data center tour. They have to change them between 4 to 6 years for the hardware that they currently have. So you have to think about what does it mean for the waste we'll end up with. And now, that's where we are. We had sustainability. I think everyone keeps hearing about sustainability, but is sustainability enough to combat these issues? I was trying to understand what does sustainability still mean, and of course you can start with the name itself. Sustain and ability, but what are we actually trying to sustain here, right? Is this the way we go about things right now, sustainable really? And even worse so, sustainability as we understand now doesn't really account for the resources that we already used. So there's just maintenance of the current situation, but it's not about regeneration of what we've already depleted. And that's why we are trying to, within the project, within this lab, we're trying to step deeper or farther. I don't know, it's not possible to decouple, of course, regenerativity from sustainability, but we're trying to be more precise with how we are thinking about.
And more ambitious.
Yes, and more ambitious. So now I'm going to give it to Judith to introduce what we're actually going to do within.
As I just mentioned, Waag has been around for 30 years, and we're a project organization doing research in projects, and we have actually quite a whole range of projects where we work with the living environment, with ecology, with sustainability, but mostly also human-focused. Some of these projects that we do is setting up citizen sensing networks, trying to spur up citizen science. How do people acquire knowledge? What does that mean for the seat that they have at the table with politicians and decision makers? And all this data focuses quite a bit on the living environment, but is still quite human-centered, I would say. But also then going to the neighborhoods where people live in and try to see like, okay, how are they rooted in their neighborhoods and how can they go about city making and place making and go on a journey of eco-interventions. This is shifting people's mindsets that they are not the center of the universe, but that we're all dependent on the ecological system and the living environment, and that we need to rebalance this also. A lot of the work that we do is also about creating this shift in, well, listening, viewing the world, understanding, and being more humble, seeing ourselves as interdependent. But as Ola just set out, the other side of the medal of technology, digital technology, is that the technology itself has quite a large ecological footprint. And we also need to critically reflect on what this actually means and where does this has an effect. So in this Designing Regenerative Technologies research project, we're actually embarking on this journey, trying to understand what this ecological effects, what these are, but also try to radically shift the way that we think about the design of technology and what does it mean to take regeneration or regenerativity as a central value for technology design. technology is not neutral because it's man-made. These systems that we build, it's all artifacts that are part of what humans do and what we think is important. And also you see in this world of multiple crises, climate crisis, biodiversity crisis, overall planetary health crisis, is that there's a huge techno-optimism that comes around the corner. If we have more innovation, if we have more high technology, then we can innovate ourselves out of these troubles, which I think is a dead end because it's treating symptoms and not the root cause of the way that we extract and source from the planet. I'm not saying you can't use any technology, but you need to be mindful of where you put your efforts and account for the effects that it has. And in that sense, regeneration and regenerativity is an interesting principle to look at because, as Ola just explained, sustainability is about sustaining things, while regeneration is about how do we source but also enrich. So it goes back and forth. It's this rebalancing. And it goes beyond sort of these quick fixes with technology or this sort of tech-optimistic view, but really it requires you to think about these systems as a whole. So if this has the raw materials that you need in order to have these digital infrastructures working, then where does this have an effect and how do you go about it? And is that then worth the effort and what do you then do back?
Yeah, maybe like this, I just keep thinking about this, but yeah, the plastic straw thing, right, or the paper straw thing, right? We also don't want to make the end users, the people, let's say, completely responsible for it, because this whole idea of that you can actually use a paper straw and then save some turtles, that's where the sustainability in some ways falls. It doesn't really address the actual core of the issue. So where does it start before we end up having a problem with a straw? We want to trace it back to the origins of the problem.
Yeah, and at Waag we often use the analogy of an iceberg to think about technology. What is above the waterline is the thing that you interact with, the digital artifact, the interface, the application, the device. But underneath, there's this whole remainder of the iceberg that is out of sight, but we need to be explicit about as well. And what we often try to focus on is this idea of a foundation, that there's something somewhere where you depart from. We need to think carefully about what this foundation is and if we have the right values central in the technology design process. The foundation can be about public values, such as regeneration or democracy or transparency or all of these things that we find important, but also thinking about, okay, what is then the aim that we're working towards? How do we arrange governance and oversight? Like all of these quite fundamental things you need to make explicit before you actually go in the whole stream of developing the technology itself. And then there's an interesting group of people already working on it. Ola is also quite invested in the permacomputing scene, but this idea of regeneration and permaculture as a concept, but also as a community of practice to think about the way that we develop technology and computing. It looks like a stretch, but it's actually quite an interesting exercise to think like, okay, if we can work with the ideas of permaculture and apply them to computing, what do we end up with? So then regeneration is the value that you can put central in the foundation. And then if you go to the design process, which follows after you set the foundation, you can actually think about who has a say in the design, who has a seat at the table when designing technology, whose voices are heard. Departing from permaculture and working with design principles that are in place in the permaculture movement can actually allow you to think differently about technology. And permacomputing is a concept, a community of practice. It's not a sort of a strict manual. It's also a playful exercise in trying to find directions that are helpful in the world of today. One of these things that quite focuses on is how do we create a radical reduction of wastefulness. So this image of e-waste is definitely something that we need to address, and that needs to be already part of the way that we design and develop and deploy technology. It's not just about a set of technical problems to be fixed. It's also about this actually shift in mindset and the way that we see the world around us. And this third one I leave to Ola to.
Understandability is aesthetic. So We have to think about how we interact with technology on the surface level, this aesthetics of it, and then that it needs to be also understandable to us. And virtual things also don't mean that they're immaterial. There's a whole bunch of things that are beyond something that is virtual and that you interact with maybe only visually, right? And also, we are not nostalgic. I don't think this is about nostalgia. We are trying to actually look at how to reduce our practice to turn towards regenerativity, but not to look to the past and be nostalgic. We are going to be moving forward, but can we move forward more mindfully, more in a way that is more balanced with us and the planet? So how did we go about it? We are starting off this regenerativity project by talking to creatives who are already applying perma-computing practices. And you can see that Leo was here as well. We interviewed Leo before as well, but he's also a fellow perma-computer. We gathered a bunch of creatives that have already either worked with perma-computing principles or had perma-computing adjacent practice. And we talked to them about how difficult is it for a creative person that works with tech, very intensely so, to start thinking in smaller terms about technology, like in trying to reduce their impact or even playfully, creatively interact with boundaries. And that's kind of where I'm heading now. First of all, the main issues that we find in those interviews is that creatives are early adopters, so they also face a lot of uncertainty with where to start, right? You're really boxed in within, for example, Adobe Suite, right? You're basically held hostage by this software, and it's really difficult to step outside of it if you want to be a practitioner. There's a bunch of hardware, of course, that demands that you have if you are working, for example, with Blender or, all the graphics software, I can't even name now. But if you are concerned about your footprint, it's really difficult. How would you go about it if you want to make a living? There's this tension there.
Do we first want to do the Q&A?
Oh, yes.
Are there questions?
What's the conclusion? Is it sustainable? Because if we look at the human history, basically we don't really do sustainable things like recycling and so on. Not really working, is it?
So on a scale that we are living right now, it's impossible, right? But there are indigenous communities that lived in a sustainable way for centuries. And of course, and here comes the Luddite moment. This is possible on our scale, but the biggest problem is that we lost our possibility to imagine other ways. So we are so complicit. Again, this colonial mindset is trickling down to our heads that we must progress, and we, of course, need resources for it. And it's almost like something that needs to be deprogrammed. So we are trying to find ways to hack mindsets via perma-computing as well within this regenerativity program. There's applicable ways to even start. So there's like an entryway to rethink your practice and do it differently. But we definitely need new narratives. So we need new imaginaries about how to do it differently, right?
And make a real effort. So I think recycling and circularity should still be part of the vision for the future. But it's also not working well because it's not a system effort, like it's small patches. There needs to be more effort, I would say, in order to have this being pushed forward. Yes?
What type of outcomes are you looking for? Do you educate policymakers? Do you present proposals to the government?
I think the first achievement is the demonstrator of the creatives that are already working in these regenerative practices with technology. So working on an inspiration guide that there are people already doing this and leading the way, and that there's a huge force for change within the creative fields. Secondly, this idea of perma-computing design principles to work with technology and see what changes you can make in designs. This list of design principles is something we're working on now that we will finish probably in the next 2 months or so. Yeah. And then the idea is to validate that with practices. Like, okay, if we have these design principles, how can we then translate that to people actually working with technology and developing technology, and then see where that leads us? We're also part of networks where more, like I would say, established tech companies are part of and government bodies are part of, where we try to advocate for these types of stories and changes and vision. That sometimes is a stretch, but definitely interesting to also widen their view from sustainability to regeneration.
You mentioned that you're creating a new set of design principles. I feel like as a designer myself, we've gone through human-centered design, regenerative design. Does a new name help the situation, or is something more dramatic needed?
yeah, the human-centered design didn't work out, did it? I mean, at least not for the environment. So we are working with the concept of non-humans. Maybe you heard of this before. And we're trying to have these principles actually work not just for us, but actually, yeah, to expand it further. We are working with perma-computing as a main guiding principle. And then within that perma-computing, there's already some guides on how to do it. But yeah, you're right that I think so many of us, you've probably had some design guidelines and human-centered design. You probably have worked with that before. And then now, how is it different? How is that going to land? Is it actually possible? This is something we also want to see. If we can actually incorporate into designing, the main aspect of being a human is empathy. That doesn't stop at your own direct environment, but you can expand it onto non-human actors as well. So ideally, that's where we are heading. We are at the beginning of this journey. This is a couple of months in. And we are also gathering knowledge directly from people, because we don't want to push principles onto people in a way that feels like lecturing. Via these interviews, I also want to understand the problems and where we are getting blocked when we want to become more regenerative, become more sustainable, right? Where are these blockers, especially for creatives, because you guys are leading the torch for what is then implemented in the wider context of the society. So ideally, we would find out from the people themselves first, where are they struggling, and then hopefully make these principles not just a fad, but something actionable. Okay, so we have 7 principles, I believe. I've chosen 3 principles that we can work with today, because I think they're more relatable to a wider audience. Okay, so what I'm going to ask you to do, try to huddle around 3 tables. We have 3 tables, if you can gather around them. You can also, it doesn't have to be tables, but each table will have a different question. And then you can form little groups that discuss it. So here we have keeping things small over here. We have keeping things flexible. And here we have hope for the best, prepare for the worst.
Which is Ola's favorite principle.
Yes, that's my favorite principle. Hope for the best, prepare for the worst, because I like to think the worst and then be positively surprised. But yeah, under each principle, there's a small explanation what it is, but I'm going to go through them again. Keep things small. Focus on accumulating wisdom. Small systems are more likely to have small hardware and energy requirements, as well as high understandability. They're easier to understand, manage, refactor, and repurpose. When was the last time you downgraded according to your actual needs? Does anybody here remember the last time they actually downgraded on hardware or software? Because I'm interested if you actually took up this challenge of reducing your tech on your own volition. That's interesting. Can you imagine in what ways you could reduce your designs, practice, redundancies in technology you use? I would like to ask you to find a partner and discuss it. So that's true for each principle. Keep it flexible. Programming and programmability should be supported and encouraged everywhere. Artificial lock-ins should be broken, actually. Design systems in a way that keeps them flexible beyond their initial use, something you can repurpose if you need to. And now the question, do you pay attention to flexibility of the software, hardware you're using or designing? How much customization and adaptability is possible with the tools you are currently using? Do you feel freed by this tool, or do you feel constrained by it? What would be the points of friction? And then you can choose one device, software, coding language, whatever you're actually working with, and then talk to the person next to you about how much freedom it provides, or if it actually limits you. Prepare for the worst, my favorite principle. Yeah, so it's about being resilient and building on solid ground and being somewhat actually optimistic, but thinking about that, sudden disappearance of the infrastructure that we have right now is very much possible, as seen in Portugal. You can also think about places in this world where people are actually cut off from technology, and they just have to do with it. And then, so this is an exercise in compassion, because just because you're well linked to technology doesn't mean that other people don't experience it. And we have to think about these things for the sake of us as humans. So assume that one crucial element of your daily use technology goes away. How would that affect your practice? Are you resilient? Are you able to survive it? So here is the keep things small table, keep things flexible, and prepare for the worst.
Very curious to hear back. Maybe you can do a bit of a plenary wrap-up and see what you would like to share from the different principles. I think here was the principle, hope for the best, prepare for the worst. Who wants to share what was central to the conversation, or something that inspired you?
So there are 3 of us in our small group, We thought first of very big things, like when the internet doesn't work anymore or we don't have smartphones. Quite interesting, all three of us were like, we'll probably be fine. Like, my work would not exist, but I'm not sure if that would be such a bad thing necessarily. But we will be fine. That was our feeling about it.
And what made you assured that you'll be fine?
Well, we used to be able to live without all this technology, so why not do it again?
Interesting.
It's very stoic.
I say that because I had a very interesting conversation with Robin, who already left, I think. He's not here, but he said something very cool, which I loved it. One was the more communal way of thinking. So that would really allow some more community-based life and work, would really download the amount of resources which you need as a community.
Rather than focusing on the individual.
Exactly,
you mean? Yeah.
because each person needs different digital equipment, like it's losing its updates like very soon, we have to throw it away. He even mentioned a library of computers, for example, which is used by one community on the different days, and also taking care about that. You don't have to buy immediately new equipment when it's irrelevant. The second idea was the fact that in this community designing, we were a bit afraid that if there will be a community, then maybe we will lose some freedom, because individual way of thinking brings you the possibility of saying yourself. But then if you design in this community thinking with a minority at the back of your head, you should find the answers which will be suitable for many different personalities also.
In that sense, a boundary is also can lead to
Kept
more
in it,
creativity.
We discussed many different things, but I wanted to build on something that you said. For example, I chose to not get a TV when moving to a new place because use is for a very short time. If needed, can use a laptop. But also this sense of this idea of making things non-urgent. Maybe there's a projector that somebody has that I can borrow at some point if I want that comfort of viewing. Another friend at some point was like, hey, I have a spare one. Do you want to try it and see if you like it? There are two things. One about things not actually being as urgent as we think it is. And then having these conversations kind of...
And then taking time, slowing down in order to see like what you actually need, and that might solve itself also.
And having happenstance conversations, right? It's not a survey of who can provide a solution for this. It comes up and it's easy, and you realize you can all use different things.
Happenstance is such a nice word.
Thanks.
Nice.
Maybe keep it flexible.
So we took a tour around flexibility. The music industry is very flexible with its software and hardware, like modular racks and multiple plugins, and so that's for some reason that culture values that and has for decades. And then we sort of veered into, say, like looking at open source. Open source is tricky because, like, yeah, you have some random person that has built something that's super fundamental and then they don't get any money for it, and so then that's not sustainable in a way. And so arguably investing in that could be inflexible because you'll be stuck if development stops. But if you have sponsorship and stewardship by a big company, then you're beholden to people, like companies having their own interest in mind. So say like someone like Facebook, so like they have a lot of open source work. Apple and Amazon don't, but arguably they're doing it for capitalist reasons, just because they've open sourced it. We benefit from that, and there's huge flexibility in that, but then also, yeah, they're sort of owning that.
So it's also about what the intention is behind.
Yeah. We didn't really get to any ideal end state, but...
Maybe from a corporate perspective, where the deepest pockets are and who can invest the most, these are the people who invest into their own data centers. And this is where you can take a conflicting view and say, part of their CSR can be moving to cloud, and commercial can be moving to cloud and more towards multi-tenancy and software subscriptions. SaaS has been around for years now. So they don't necessarily invest into the hardware and keep it a little more reusable. So there you start reducing the footprints, where if you start moving these biggest players, you have a chance at saving more.
How does that relate to flexibility?
Keeping it flexible is they can either lock in or lock out of a SaaS subscription. That is not so much of a strong footprint they're leaving as compared to keeping the service on their dime.
I understand. Maybe move to the third principle. Keep things small.
Anybody, please.
I can
Yes.
say something. So I have an old Nokia.
Okay.
So keep things small. Like 3-4 years ago, my smartphone broke down, and I got Nokia to replace it just temporarily. But then the fixing took weeks, and then I got my smartphone back, and I was afraid to open it again, and it was 3-4 weeks without anything, and it was lovely. And since then, I also have a smartphone which I just use when I really need it, and except for that, my days are with Nokia, and it's lovely.
Good for you. It sounds
Very
tempting. So you have these live events, right? When there's an opportunity for change, and maybe when your phone breaks down, it's actually opportunity to downscale or to make different choices.
Yeah, and it also allows you to realize how much time you spend on it. When you open it again, then you see all these group chats, and you're like starting to read back what you have missed, and you're thinking, how amazing was it that I missed this? It puts it into perspective.
Yeah. Anything else from the Keep Things Small group?
I haven't discussed this with my group, but I also am thinking about the craze about like the biggest processors and like qubits computers, like supercomputers, like quantum computers and all that, and like bigger, faster, better, whatever. But I feel like I'm more interested into like the single purpose computers that can exist, like very specific circuit boards that can do one thing really well for really low energy consumption, minerals and land, like a thermometer or a solar panel manager. I feel like those are the computers that are like the simplest uses that can be the most useful,
With one purpose.
as opposed to smartphones or super huge computers powering huge data centers.
It's crazy that these phones we have in our pockets are so powerful for actually not so much reason, right? There's more computing power in our phones than the computer that sent people onto the moon. And that's in our pocket, so that's insane. And then so clearly keeping things small is possible for that, but you need to start thinking, on the design level, actually, what am I actually wanting? What do I want to achieve? Then there's a question about redundancy. Does amassing computing power really bring me what I need? Can I reduce that as well? It's hard because we are so dependent on it, and I can imagine that going without your phone is the perfect opportunity, right? But
because you're saying like redundancy, but it's also a mental state or an ideology. It makes social media redundant. Like, what does it mean that it's redundant? And we're now living in a society where people feel like it is not redundant. You can ask those questions.
Yeah.
All right.
Just
Thanks,
one more
everyone.
thing, there's a happenstance moment. I really like this moment, like just to give yourself these opportunities to stop and, actually, do I need to do it? This has happened exactly to me as well because my phone is tiny. But my regular smartphone, this is also a smartphone because unfortunately I cannot decouple yet. I had this exact same moment when I was like, do I want to just keep going, even for the sake of my own brain, to be locked in and doom scroll, or can I shift a little? And that was a small shift, but already feels a little bit better. Thank you so much. It was great.
Thanks, everyone.